Going?
Good.
Okay, great. All right, welcome everybody to the December HCD meeting. Last one of the year. We have a thin crowd, so I guess that means everybody thinks we're doing all right and just everybody's already on vacation. Keith is texting, he's caught over at the courthouse with his job and will be here shortly, but we can go ahead and get started. So we can also actually still do approval of the minutes without him, so do you have, is there a motion to approve minutes?
So moved.
And I second, and so we're all in favor. Done. All right, moving on to updates and reports. Let's start with staffing, Michael.
Okay, first off, thank you for everybody for being here. With the staffing updates, we'd like to welcome Andrew Mayrow, who is our new CD analyst. I think some of you know him, but is this the second introduction, or did we do this last time? Okay, great. He's about 2 weeks into the process, and will be handling most of the housing development issues that we have with the land use incentive grant, as well as home program and some other programs. So, thank you, Andrew.
Welcome, Andrew. Andrew's been, I think most folks know this, he's been hanging around this issue for several years now and working in various capacities. And I was so excited to see the memo that you're on board, so congratulations. Look forward to working with you.
Yeah, it's a good time to be here.
Yeah, lots going on.
And then also Sandra Anderson, who is our CD analyst that was handling most of the community development block grant funding, announced her retirement last month, and Friday will be her last day. She was here for 6 years, and prior to that, she was at the city of Greenville for several years. And we'll definitely miss her. And we do have a replacement that will be, she was retired on the 21st, that would hopefully be starting on January 15th. So keeping staffing completely full.
Great, great. Can you share who that is, or do you need to wait?
I must wait.
Okay, okay. And I don't see Sandra. Is she here? Is she hiding behind the column? No? Okay. Well, the donuts and coffee are in her honor, so if you see her, wish her well and thank her for the donuts and coffee, and Sam too.
When's her last day?
Friday.
Friday.
Yeah. And please just pass on to her our gracious thanks for all of her service.
I will do that.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, is this your first meeting sort of being up here all by yourself?
Yes.
Okay, well, fully welcome to Michael. We're excited that you're here and flying, well, obviously nobody flies on their own, but you're flying on your own here, so.
Well, I've always got Sam, so.
Yeah.
And also Jeff is sitting in the audience, so I mean, there's a lot of backup.
You can't get too far out of line.
No.
Okay, any questions on updates and reports? I've got a couple, but do you guys have any? All right. I had a question about the Community Land Trust. The updates indicated they had applied for some grants, and my question is, if those grants come in, or maybe they did come in, I think they were awarded, are the foundations holding that money right now, or who's holding money that gets granted to the Community Land Trust?
Is this on? Okay, yeah, hi, Paul D'Angelo with the Community Development Department. So yeah, we just had our meeting last night, and it was actually great because the Finance Committee and the Community Engagement Committee handed out a list of these grants that they've applied for and the ones that they've gotten. So it's the same question that I had. They've received a $5,000 grant and a $20,000 grant, and I think they both will fall into our laps after December, the end of this month, or the beginning of next week, like right at the end of the year. And that'll fall into the CLT's account, and then they're gonna start talking compliance of what they have to do with those grants. But it's kind of great, they've gotten $25,000. One of them was for, $5,000 was I think for the website and some communication information like that. And the $20,000 could help with staffing issues, office space. That was exciting. They've also applied for 2 other grants with the Z. Reynolds Smith, and thank you, and one for $30,000 and one for $100,000, and that would be $30,000 for 2 years and $100,000 each for 4 years. So we're excited to see when those due dates come, or if they've applied. We'll wait to see, but yeah, it's kind of exciting.
That's great.
Capacity is being built. We're going to see how they go first quarter.
That's Great, and so that, again, that money is coming into the city's account for CLT right now, or do they have their own bank account?
I believe that'll go into their own bank account, that'll be there, they're all set up for all that,
Okay.
thanks to Pisco Legal and the folks over there, yeah.
Super,
Mhm.
okay, great, well, thanks.
Sure, thanks.
And then my other question was about the Code Purple report, and thank you for that. Yeah, Brian, it's not really a question, it's really just I just want to sort of put my own thoughts out there that, you know, if, I know some of the issues that we faced have been around, you know, putting city resources toward security at some of the shelters to make them more available and allow them to accept more people. My own view that I've shared with Michael and Sam, and I'll share it with you and the rest of the committee, is that's an expensive city resources that I would be happy to invest in, and particularly, well, so there's the security side of things, if that's where that ends up going. I know the advocates are looking at a variety of ways, but then more specifically on the bus to the restoration quarters, and thank you for working hard to make that happen.
Well, thanks to Jessica on that, and her team.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we can do is we can just make policy decisions to say, you know, on certain days, the bus is free. So for instance, on election day, the bus is free. We just do that for everybody. And what I'm wondering is if we can make a similar policy decision that on Code Purple days, the bus to the Veterans Restoration Quarters is free for anybody going there. And so that you don't have to maybe go through some of the hoops that you had to go through this last time.
Sure, I
Yeah.
need to get official here.
Yeah.
So yes, so Jessica Morris at ART helped arrange, so when Code Purple has been called, if you are experiencing homelessness and have the HMIS ID card that Homeward Bound typically issues, you can ride from the Cox Avenue terminal to VRQ at no charge and then back the next morning. And we adjusted that just when we had adverse weather events like we had last weekend, and ART was going to shut down early. It was originally scheduled to be between particular hours, but now anytime Code Purple is in effect, it's free between those 2 points during the day. So if we want to expand that to other routes as well, I mean, that's another discussion, but VRQ seem to be the most urgent destination, and it's the E2 and the 170 routes that go out that way at various times.
And I guess what I'm wondering is if we could do away with the requirement for people to show that card. I think maybe not, I'm looking at Brian's here somewhere, maybe not everybody has that card. And, you know, just if we can eliminate that barrier, if you're experiencing homelessness and you need a place to go on Code Purple, you can get on the bus and go there.
I think if Jessica Morris and her team are okay with that, I don't think you'd find any argument from anybody else on that. I think that there was a concern about just wanting to make sure people are eligible for that particular
Service.
swath of service right there. But if we want to eliminate the requirement for the ID, that Jessica's good with that. I'm certainly good with that.
Well, and maybe, Sam, I'm looking at you, maybe we can, you know, again, sort of like we do, I mean, this is easier because the bus is just free on election day period, but maybe we can just say on Code Purple days, you know, the E2 and the 170 are free.
We can certainly check.
I don't know if we have to make them free for everyone, but
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We can follow up with transportation, and if there's any policy action that needs to be done, I think we can probably have that in place by, you know, the first meeting in January.
Yeah.
If there is administrative responsibility that needs to occur, again, I think we can certainly, we have, I think, you know, the consensus of this committee, you know, to move forward administratively. So we'll certainly follow up with transportation and transit.
I know that on the election day thing, we have to address that as part of the fees and charges conversation. So if we would need to assume X number of Code Purple days,
Right.
that, you know, people might not be paying for those buses, and if that's the way we need to deal with it.
And I would expect that may be, I don't know, Janice, if you know, but it's probably getting very similar.
Yeah.
And so the process would probably be similar.
Does that make sense to you guys? Is that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think any barriers that we can
Yeah,
eliminate
exactly.
are great, yeah,
We
yeah,
should
absolutely.
not make it hard for people who don't have a car to get on the bus and find a place to stay. So,
Good.
okay,
All right.
thanks. All right. Okay, so, all right, so nothing else on updates from anybody?
Well, I would like to add, we did receive notice from HUD today that our annual plan has finally been reviewed by them at the Greensboro office. We'd also heard last week, am I echoing too much here?
No?
Okay. That heard last week that within the next few days, we should receive the funding agreements to the manager's office or the mayor's office. I'm not sure where they send it. We need to keep our eyes open for the CDBG funding because we still have not received that agreement, so it's not in our federal system yet, but that should be within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Great.
And
Again, unless we have a shutdown.
Well, unless there's, I mean, we have to play it by ear. I mean, there could be other continuing resolutions or shutdown. We will deal with that.
No control over.
Exactly. And that's all I have, unless somebody else has a comment.
Anything from you all on the updates? All right, so moving on to unfinished business. So at our last meeting, we had a conversation that tried to wrap up, oh, shoot. Sorry, I gotta get, well, disconnected to the internet because it's driving me nuts. We had a conversation culminating some community conversations about SPF and CDBG. And so we have a staff memo with some recommendations on that right now. And just want to check in with folks and see if we, in fact, see if we're good with what the staff is recommending. That is not what I want either. Yeah, I just want that. Yeah, it kicks, every time my iPad kicks off, it kicks me off. I've got it, thank you. Okay, so the recommendations coming from the staff are, there are 3 at this point. So the first one, that for CDBG public service funding request specifically, so this is the piece of CDBG that is capped, that funding requests cannot exceed 85% of the overall project budget, or an alternative percentage to be determined by us. So if the project is $10,000, the most you can ask for CDBG is $8,500. Is that right?
That would be correct.
Okay. So trying to essentially encourage people to go find other funders for some of this work. Is that, you all good with that one? Okay. The second one is, okay, so this is the capacity building piece of it. So what we had said last time was we wanted to sort of carve some money off the top of SPF to set aside for capacity building. That's what we had said. Staff is saying it might be a little bit premature to do that. I want to have a little conversation about that. So essentially, staff is not recommending anything firm on this right now, but again, I still have an interest in doing something here, so I don't know if anybody else wants to add to
But I
that.
was hoping that we can look at all of them individually, because I'm glad we've taken our time and really taken a look at this entire process, because we get a lot of feedback from the community concerning how hard and burdensome it is. So I just want us to, I'm glad that we have taken our time and put a lot of insight into it. And thank the staff for actually, diving into it and going through the community engagement process, because that's very important, because those 2 entities really have to carry the entire burden of the process. what I'm most interested in is to make sure that year after year, we don't make changes based on the situation. Based on how the last funding cycle went and, you know, whether we agree with how things have gone or not. I want it to be very comprehensive because I think that's doing the entire process in our community justice. So upon looking at the first recommendations, the first actions, I thought that they were very structured. And when you have a lot of structure in place, that automatically impairs people's ability to enter into a process. But when we really look at it as strategies more than just static criteria, I think that gives us an opportunity, using strategy instead of structure. I think that gives this committee an opportunity to really apply the equity lens. The recommendations that have been presented by staff, I believe that they're well thought out because of the narrative that came along within the staff memo. And I agree with all the recommendations. I do want us to have a conversation about the recommendation around the cap at 85% of the overall budget, because automatically larger organizations or organizations who have a larger project budget, they're going to be awarded more funding, and that amount may actually eat up the smaller applications asked. We need to really think about that. And also but I agree with the other two. I think capacity building is very important for our community, especially our grassroots organizations, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford sometimes this type of opportunity. So I know that there's been some conversations here about how to make that easy, because we don't want to put a time burden on organizations who are already spread pretty thin. So those are kind of my thoughts. I agree with the recommendations that have been put forth. But again, with the original ideas that we came up with, I think we can use those as strategies, and I don't think we should put those as gospel, as, you know, as just the writing in the sand, you know, if you understand that.
Yeah, so maybe, let me see if I'm trying to understand you. So one of the things that we had talked about again was sort of is tying capacity building to some level of award. And again, in my mind, that becomes then a strategy to help strengthen, to help strengthen groups for the longer term. And I'm kind of interested in, I'm still interested in doing that. To your point, a lot of smaller groups don't have the resources to do capacity building. And if we've already said we're willing to set aside a pot of money for that to make that happen, then I think we need to encourage groups to really do that. Having run a small nonprofit, I know that capacity building is the last thing that you want to take the time to do. It's also the thing that you need to take the time to do. So I'm just going to put a proposal out there that, as I've been thinking about it. So this would be all right, so for groups that get awards under $10,000 that are smaller organizations, and you know, we can pick a threshold amount. The threshold amount in my head is $100,000, which I'll explain in just a minute, but that groups that get awards of under $10,000 and have an annual budget of less than $100,000 would be required to do sort of two capacity building things during the year. So one would be a board, very specifically a board development capacity building course, and those are out there. Pittsburgh Legal offers them, Nonprofit Pathways offers them. There may be other groups that offer them, and then that the other capacity building course be of the choosing of the organization. If they want help with fundraising, if they want help with communications, if they want help with setting up QuickBooks, whatever it is that they might need as an organization, whatever their particular struggles and challenges are that they feel like they could use some help with, they would be free to choose that second piece of capacity building. And then the pot of money that we have set aside would pay for that. And again, there are organizations out there that offer these courses, that offer the support, and what we're saying, I think, as a city is we're going to provide you the resources as smaller organizations to try to build yourself up, build your strength, increase your capacity, to do stronger work, do more impactful work, have a stronger organization going forward. So and the reason, the 100,000 threshold, just so I'm clear about that, so Western North Carolina Nonprofit Pathways has services and opportunities, capacity building opportunities that are open to everybody but then when you hit that $100,000 annual budget mark, then that opens up another set of services that are available to you that are just not available to smaller organizations. So that's sort of why I'm picking that threshold. We could make it different, but again, if you're at that $100,000 threshold, then you actually have a whole nother set of services that you can access that smaller groups just can't through that particular organization.
So let me jump in real quick. So I didn't make any comments after Councilwoman Smith spoke, just to clarify. You're saying the strategies that we put forth to keep them as sort of soft guidelines, not hard lines, and it allows this body a bit more flexibility to apply a lens of equity. Is that?
Yes, actually last time, I think we, in the moment, we were coming up with some strategies. I think we didn't really go into it with strategies as a committee because we aren't really to discuss how things like that go. But I do like some of that flexibility with what was proposed in the other meetings. To me, were just a little rigid. That's why I said that I appreciate that we have really taken the time to really think everything out. And with the actions requested by the staff, I think that shows more of a comprehensive look at it and not just kind of situational based on how we feel or, just a look backwards. But I do believe that in applying the equity lens, you do need a little more flexibility, and to structure it just straight up and down will actually kind of other organizations who are historically underfunded.
I did have another question for you. So, Julie talked about the capacity building, and that's in here as one of the, it's not in here as one of the recommendations to follow up on, but she eloquently put that, she believes in that. What's your opinion on it, just out of curiosity?
Well, it is one of the recommendations that
Right.
I agree with. It's one of the three. I believe that we should put some criteria in place around that because I think that is kind of us doing our due diligence to the community, and we get the better outcomes when we offer that to our small organizations. I did want to hear staff's feedback around the statement that was made. They said that they believe that this recommendation was just a little premature without first assessing the grantee's perceived need. And I just wanted some feedback from you all on that one specific thing because you all kind of interface with organizations a little more than we do.
Okay, basically, when we started looking at the comments, we started looking at the survey, everything else that we had available to us, we didn't want to come out with a recommendation, structured, essentially. And one of the things we wanted to do is actually, in the application that we just put out, we have several different basically a survey of what kind of capacity building does your organization want to participate in. So that was, to me and to staff, kind of a way to gauge the people's own perception of their needs. And that's kind of why we settled on that type of recommendation. And I think that what was proposed just a minute ago by Councilperson Mayfield was that, yes, if we required perhaps one type of board, board development to do whatever responsibilities, whatever training that's a requirement. The other one would be something, whatever they wanted, which is part of that survey. And by doing the survey, we could also see if 20 or 10 different organizations wanted to do fundraising, we could just go and set up a fundraising capacity building day. And so just basically go off of what our grantees say that they'd like to see.
I like what you recommended, that one should be around board development, and then we leave the other one open for the organization to determine based on their needs.
Right. How does that?
Would the chairwoman like to make the motion
Make
with
the
the specific
motion.
wording that's comparable to her?
Sure, so just on, so that, on that point, and again, the universe of organizations we would be talking about are organizations that get, well, so there's two thresholds. There's the organizations who have a budget of under $10,000, so, I mean, under $100,000, so really trying to focus on the smaller organizations. That seems to make sense, okay. Then, you know, do we want to put an award, a limitation on the award? It actually seems to me that probably the thing that makes more sense if you're an organization under $100,000, regardless of the size of the award you get, you probably can take advantage of this. You probably would want to take advantage of the capacity building. So maybe it's just, we don't tie it to an award amount. It's just, and I'm thinking that through right now. So Michael, you've got a thought about that, but,
Well, actually opening it up to whomever feels, I mean, anybody that's receiving over $10,000, I mean, that could be beneficial.
over $10,000,
Yeah.
right? I think earlier I had said under 10, and I was like, that doesn't make sense,
No,
but it's
over.
anybody over 10.
Yeah, over
Okay,
10.
so over 10, you receive over 10, and you're making less than $100,000, that's the university groups we're talking about, and that those groups would be required to do two capacity, as a condition of the grant, two capacity building exercises during the year. One would be specifically a board development workshop, and the other would be of their choosing. On the board development, it matters a lot who goes to that. So on that one, I want to suggest that maybe the executive director and at least maybe two board members go to that.
Or more.
Or more, right? It could be as many as you want, but that you've got at least the executive director and a couple of board members who are going to that. My own experience is that when there are more people in the organization hearing the things, that you actually hear more things, and it's more helpful. And then the other one, because it would be whatever they're choosing, they would choose who goes to that, and how many. And again, the pot of money that we have set aside would fund their participation, everybody's participation in both of those things. And then I guess the other, I think this capacity building could happen at any time. To some degree, there is, what I don't want us to do is sort of always be a year behind. So if the award happens in March, the contract doesn't happen until, well, here we are in December, and people are already applying for the next year. So what I want to suggest is that the effort is made to do the capacity building between the time of the award and the time of the contract. So that's like a 6 or 7 month period. So that then, again, it's a condition of the grant. By the time the contracting comes around, we know that they've met that condition. And obviously there can be exceptions. I mean, if somebody gets really sick and they just can't do it, then, they're happy to lead staff to make those calls, but that would be my recommendation.
Would staff be able to track that as a recommendation for a motion?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's my motion.
Okay,
On
that's
that,
definitely-
on that particular piece,
I just had one, is there and what if they don't meet that criteria? I'm just thinking, just it might impact their future applications, or could there be something else?
so I think if it's required to happen between March, when we make the awards, and when the contract gets signed 6, 7 months later, then if that requirement isn't met, then the contract doesn't get signed and they don't get the award. They can come back again the next year to apply, but then, again, the same criteria might be in
So all
place.
this would happen before they get the actual.
That's my suggestion, otherwise, we would be, we might be granting an award to them, a second award before they've met the criteria of the first award, do you see what I'm saying?
Do we know, how the program is scheduled throughout that 7-month period to make sure that they know when it's available?
Yeah, I did, so they're nonprofit pathways, I keep mentioning them because they're sort of the primary capacity building organization in our region. They have courses all year long. They actually have a board development course at the end of April, maybe. They offer a number of things throughout the year that are, easy enough for people. I mean, between now and, in the next year, they'll offer a dozen or more capacity building opportunities.
Can they claim how many sessions are available between that 7-month window?
And then there's also, again, other groups, like Pisco Legal, you mentioned Michael does a board training. And then to the point that you made earlier, if the applications indicate that a bunch of people want to do a fundraising, then that's just something staff could put together.
Exactly. What we would probably do is go out and seek out the services that different organizations will provide. That whole smorgasbord, essentially, of capacity building, whether it's board, whether it's fundraising, whether it's staff development, and try to come back with a recommendation of how we proceed with that. But we want to open it up to other organizations just to see exactly what the costs are, what the type of training is, what the deliverables are, and to make sure that we're making the right choices.
And I think we would look to have a syllabus, if you would, that would make available probably by March or early April, that we can make available to the different grantees. So again, they know what kinds of course development, options they'll have on top of, in addition to the board capacity.
Right.
And it sounds like within your motion, you're making it mandatory for the executive director to be there. Is that a?
For the board one, yeah.
And that's what I have that in the motion.
How about we take Julie's motion and, should we pass it or whatever, you say it comes back as formal criteria to then vote on? Or is everybody happy with what she said going forward and just walking away with it?
What I was mostly talking about was the actual mechanics of it happening, so I don't know if that would need an additional board action.
Probably not, but you have
I just had a kind of comment, I kind of feel like CDBG and SBF are getting confused here, because the SBF grants, we have money available July 1st, there's no 4 to 6 months.
You're right, I forgot, sorry, thank you,
So,
thank you.
yeah, so that really.
Okay, so that actually makes it easier then, so just during the course of I would say before they put in another application, they just need to meet that requirement. So that would then be, it's the same sort of 6-month period of time. Although, actually, it's even longer. It would be from the time of the award at the end of March through February, or January. Applications are due, February. So it's almost a year. They have almost a year to meet that requirement.
I'll second the motion, as Julie stated, and then maybe we can comment.
Yeah, so we'll do, and then also, all right, so I'm gonna set that aside for just a second, and then, so the first recommendation was around the 85% of the overall project budget, and Shanika, you expressed a concern about that. All this is saying, though, is that it can't exceed 85%. It doesn't mean that they have to request 85%. Is that?
Exactly, and I think, the purpose of that is we always want any organization, including ourselves, to be seeking out other funding for projects and to match that or to enhance the funding that the city's providing. If that number is not high enough, you could change that 95%, or
Or is your concern
Not
that
at all.
it's too high?
My concern is how do we come up with the number, and do we want to discuss what the number could
could be? I just kind of want to know the thinking behind the 85%.
Well, if the project was a $100,000 project, okay, and they're getting 50, okay, my brain stopped working, I'm sorry.
Switch to CDBG.
But, exactly, off of,
Right.
but basically, our grant would be, if it's a $100,000 project, would not be 90,000, it could only be 85,000, $15,000 would have to come from another source. It should that be 90%, and $10,000 comes from another source.
Or should it be less? Should you have to get more money from another source? So,
It could be 50-50,
or
but
other
I-
sources?
But I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, it could be whatever sort of additional participation you'd like to see entities.
85 is good. I mean, it's again, we're gonna be experimenting with all of this year, so we'll see how it goes. Okay, so the emotion is all the stuff we said earlier about CDBG, about SPF, I'm not gonna say it again, plus the CDBG recommendation, and then there is no recommendation on the tiered grant process, which I think is, everybody's fine.
Say that again?
So the last.
Because I seconded the motion for capacity building.
Right, so we can do them, let's just do them in separate motions. So, but let's just take public comment at this point on the recommendations that are, so that motion, the CDBG motion, it sounds like we are in agreement on the 85%, and then we can come back and talk about the tier, but, okay, Brian.
So the one thing on the 85% funding, some of the things that are funded through CDBG are done on a community-wide basis. So Homeward Bound does coordinated entry as representing both all of the city agencies and all the other nonprofits. And so that would require us to go out and get private fundraising dollars to support a citywide function. And that coordinated entry function is actually done in many communities by the city government or the county government.
Is that in the public service category?
I believe so.
It is. So we had actually talked about if there were a way to actually even move that out of CDBG, but maybe not. Okay, so that's a good point.
Second comment, just on the other issue you were talking about on capacity building for nonprofits. I've sat on the board of lots of small startup nonprofits, and I agree they need capacity building. What I think you ought to require is them coming up with a capacity building plan for you, if they're under $100,000, and not be too prescriptive in it. Reason being is because from year to year, if you're under 100,000, you're gonna come back year after year. If you're prescriptive, they'll have to do board development work every year, when in fact what they need to work on are financial management controls, fundraising, staff development, some other element. So I would recommend you say they have to come up with a plan for capacity building for their organization, and if you want, then give suggestions for what that plan would contain, addressing the 5 top things any small nonprofit ought to be working on. And that's also probably a simpler resolution than something that gets into board development, requires EDs or board members to go to certain trainings. It'd just be simpler for, I think, nonprofits to interpret that and come back with a plan.
Okay, good comment. Any other comment?
Excuse me.
Should I come to the mic or stand
I was
up?
gonna say that, I think.
Oh, I guess
probably
we are-
need to come to the mic because we are streaming.
Sorry, I totally forgot about that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, first of all, I totally echo everything he just said. I think that's really important and great. The other thing is with the capacity building, the timeline for completion of capacity building activities being within basically the first 6 months, right, July through December-ish, because that's when the next grant is due? No?
Well, it could actually be from the end of March, from the date of the award.
Except,
They could start that, they could do that at any time.
except that the award doesn't come in March.
I get it.
So for organizations that are under $100,000 especially, they may not be operating with the reserve capital to be able to outlay those expenses ahead of time for reimbursement for a significant time before the first award first portion is drawn down. And actually that very first drawdown can happen as late as November, December, even January, because of the contracting and also sort of reporting requirements inherent. And so I wanted to put that out there. It could be a little bit of a burden for small organizations.
Well, I think what we're talking about is the organizations ideally not putting out any cash at all. The pot of, so again, the award for capacity building does not come out of your grant. It's money that we are setting aside separately. We are carving off money off the top of SPF. And staff will need to figure out how the reimbursement goes and whether, but I think to your point, the idea is that the groups would not need to front that money, because you're right, if you send 3 people to a capacity building, that can be $150 and they may not have that. So, yeah, I agree. Any other comment? Greg?
Hi, Greg Gorham, Children First Week in Schools. I really appreciate this discussion about capacity building, and I think that's such a neat thing. Nonprofits are businesses and employers too, so building them up is a good thing for our economy. And I would say that I like this idea of a prescriptive plan. I think the comment on the timing that Nicole brought up, because I now understand that the city's going to be paying for that, but we all have the funds budgeted by March to fund anything that happens before your new fiscal year. So does that really then mean that the trainings wouldn't be able to start till sometime after July? And then the other question too is, I think, having worked in nonprofits for 25 years, there's a lot of different levels of training and development and workshops to go to at a lot of different price points. And so I think having the conversation or having staff kind of look at what resources are kind of going to be on your list, or kind of, like what is going to be approved or paid for, to help y'all figure out how much money to set aside will be important, because they come in all shapes, sizes, and costs too. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, so question about, to this point around timing. So if someone gets an award at the end of March and there's a board training at the end of April that they want to go to, even though, again, because SPF is this weird next year thing, would the groups need to wait until July to start doing that capacity building because of our budget cycle? Or would there, could we sort of say, yes, we're gonna pay for this out of this year's budget, but knowing that we have it in next year's budget?
I'll take a stab at it, and I think that would be our goal, is to look to see how we can work. We'd work with Marvin, and there's some admin money that we might be able to use. That would be our goal. And honestly, I think part of the goal would be, even on the FPF projects, to try and have the menu so that folks who are getting an FPS, a strategic partnership. I'm thinking of sunscreen. I think a strategic partnership grant, that we would have the menu and would try to work with our groups to see if they can start that, so that they have the ability to do that kind of work before July 1. It may or may not be something, because again, we're going to be dependent on some of the training providers. But I think the two things we look for is to try and get the menu set up, to try and have as many of those classes available as we could for folks to start, and then work internally on with our finance folks to see how we could pay for the training. So that's not the perfect answer today, but that would certainly be our goal.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's maybe a little bit more to work out, but maybe at least what we can say is, by the time the next March rolls around and we're making award decisions, you've got to have it done by then. Whether that can start, whether that ends up being a full year or something less than that, you've got to have it by then. So not by the application date, but by the award date. Okay. All right. And kind of to Brian's point, so that makes sense to me. Here's what I'm going to suggest on that, is that this year we stick with the motion that I made, that all of those groups go through the board training, and then one other of their own choosing. And then after that, I think, you know, if groups continue to come back and are in that category again and again, then in subsequent years, they can choose what they like. But that sort of as a starting, and that all going forward, you know, this year, everybody will do the board, and then going forward, all new grantees would need to do the board training. And then after that, if you come back again and you've done the board training, then you can pick whatever makes the most sense for you. But, I mean, a strong organization starts with a strong board, and I think we just want to make sure that everybody is able to avail themselves of that particular training if they're new grantees. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I would, Councilman Young, as
I have
the
no
second
objection
to the
that.
motion.
I have no objection.
I think we've got it between
Okay.
Megan, me, Mike, Janice, and Kathy. I think we've got
Great.
the sense of the motion. I just want to make sure you're okay with it.
Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna do this, I'm gonna do this in three different motions. So we have a motion on all the SPF stuff that we just talked about with capacity building. So I made the motion, Keith seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay. Second motion will be on the particular recommendation around CDBG public service. Fund request cannot exceed 85% of the overall project budget.
Now, just out of clarification, is this where,
Okay, we need to talk about your issue, sorry.
is this where we wanted to reserve the flexibility to, I'm just wanting to make sure that whatever the essence of what you were saying is preserved, so is that part of this, or is it,
No, so CDBG would be,
that was asking Councilwoman Smith?
oh, I'm sorry.
I believe that the way it's stated, it's not, well, the way it's written is not how I took it, but the explanation that you gave, it gives me a little peace, because I thought it was a lot different, but I think I'm okay with what staff suggested.
Okay. So we do, can we confirm that Brian, what is it? It's the
Coordinated entry.
the coordinated entry, where does that, Brian, you did say that comes out of public service.
Pretty sure that it does, correct? Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do about that?
After review, that could just be an exception. Yeah, I mean, if that was something that was a city mandate or a citywide program, I could understand that. But we just have to review it to make sure that we're applying this equitably to all organizations that are applying for the CDBG funds.
And just to be clear, again, that is a service that Homeward Bound provides that enables us to get everything else.
Right. It's a HUD mandate.
It's a HUD mandate.
It's a HUD
right.
mandate to be done so we get the funds.
Okay, so then I'm gonna make a motion that we take this recommendation, that CDBG public service funding request cannot exceed 85% of the overall project budget, with the exception of the, why can't I remember what it's called?
Coordinated entry.
Coordinated entry funding, which is a requirement, a HUD requirement. So that's my motion on that.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then there was the third staff recommendation was not adopting any kind of tiered grant process. If you remember last time we talked about, maybe SBF is, you have to come in at either 5 or 10 or 15 or something, and staff is recommending not to do that. I'm fine with that.
So moved.
I don't know that we need a motion, but
Okay.
we're just not moving to do it. Yeah, not moving to do it. Okay, so is that what we have? Is that what we need? To throw a wrench into it, so there are groups that come in for CDBG funding that don't come in for SPF funding. Really the question is sort of, if there are groups that come in for CDBG that fall into that same category of less than $100,000 and more than $10,000 grant request, is there a reason we would not also want to require the same capacity building?
They're all nonprofits. They all have nonprofit boards. They could all benefit from capacity building. I would, since I've been here, I've actually learned that there's that separation between the strategic partnership funds and CDBG public services, and, you know, the application is very similar and similar types of programs. There's still organizations that are going out and serving, you know, citizens in Nashville that really need those services, and they have nonprofit boards, so board strength, fundraising, all that's important to them too. But maybe this is something, because that funding has been delayed by HUD, is this something that you could possibly look at at the next meeting, or do you want to discuss it now?
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, as long as we're doing it now, I sort of, if nobody can think of any reason not to take that same, and I think it is a relatively small universe of groups, and if they come in for CDBG as opposed to SBF, or in addition to SBF, because some groups do come for both, is there any reason that anybody can think of why we would not also want to put that in place for CDBG applicants, the capacity building piece?
I'd open it to
Yeah,
comments.
any comment on that?
Yes, I have a comment. In my opinion,
Tell us who you are.
my name is Jay Hackett, Green Opportunities. In my opinion, the CDBG grant is different from the SPF grant. They are two different funding sources. They have two different requirements, and I think that they should not be treated equally. And so the strategic partnership may have these thresholds because they have less requirements. It's not as difficult to perform on that grant. And the CDBG has more requirements. And so in the sense of us as a community representing what the government trusts the city with as a whole, the expectations are higher. And so kind of comparative to a college, and there are prerequisites. Now, you can either test out of a prerequisite because you're there already, or you take the prerequisite so you're better prepared to compete at another level. I see the CDBG as a more competitive grant. It's a more challenging grant, and in order for us to represent this city better among the other cities that receive CDBG, I think that the capacity building should be reserved for SPF. And if another agency just requests it and wants to participate, it should be open to them because it's a city allowance, or the city has made it available to nonprofits. But it should not be a requirement. I don't think it should show up inside the CDBG. I think that the CDBG has its challenges, but agencies have to step up to the plate and learn how to navigate that.
Okay. Other thoughts from the two of you about that?
I think it's beneficial. I think it's beneficial for all organizations who ever receive money from the city to be the best organizations that they can be, regardless of what the assumption might be.
What pot of money?
Right. I think you want, even an organization that has a long extended track record of working in the community shouldn't be exempt from being better or improving or making themselves the best organization that they can. I think I don't see a downside from it. I would say that if it's believed to possibly be a burden or a gnat in the face of an organization, I think I don't see that. I would welcome comments from the audience if anyone else that would like to offer up anything, but I feel like it's beneficial to all organizations, no matter the size or scope of what the work that you're doing. All the work is important regardless of the size of your organization. And the competency of your board is even more important.
We had another comment. Yeah, no, come on up, Nicole.
Very quick, sorry.
Regarding the CDBG public service dollars, in the same way that the SBF funds would be kind of like scraping a layer off of the total pot available in order to separately fund capacity, is that correct? I'm wondering where the funds would come from for the CDBG public service. My understanding, which could be completely incorrect, is that because that is limited to 85% or whatever of the entire CDBG budget, you might not be able to actually take funds from economic development and those other areas that have much more money to be able to provide capacity building to the people within the public services cap. And so would there be a kind of also scraping off a layer of funds available within public services, which is small and highly, highly competitive? Or would funds be able to come from somewhere else and hopefully not SPF?
Yeah, I think, oh, well, hopefully not SPF. So I guess my thinking had been that that same SPF pot would be used for any organization applying to CDBG that would be, again, in that small universe of organizations, so that it would, and we haven't talked about what that amount is. I'm thinking $5,000 out of the SPF pot, I think probably would be sufficient. But does anybody see a problem with using SPF dollars to do capacity building for groups that get CDBG funding?
I don't, again, I would, want to do a little more work with Marvin and our folks, and the other thing I would say is, again, the departmental budget that we have for community and economic development also has some, we don't have a lot of funds, but we have some funds that are available for contract services that we could potentially, pool perhaps with some of the money that's coming off the top if we need to provide this service. But yeah, I don't think there was the intention to take funds from CDBG.
Particularly not public service.
Right.
Marvin, tell us it can work.
Okay, I'm just sitting back here, being staff, I usually don't let them give my recommendation, but is there any reason why?
Oh yeah, go ahead and step up to the mic.
The CD department doesn't set up 1, 2, or 3 now I'm having Michael's brain thoughts, but meetings or board meetings that we sort of set the agenda on what a board should be and what a board needs to learn. We'll hire the contractors, we'll give you 3 times during the year that you can show up. That way we can keep our costs under control. We know what people should be learning, and we would sponsor it. And so we say, here's 3 times a year, somebody's got to show up if you want the money. And I think it would just keep it more control.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, you guys can talk about that. I actually think it's easier to use the external infrastructure that's already there of these groups that already do this. And they've got people who've been teaching it for years. The city doesn't have to go find those people. It's just already set. There's a lot of this out there, as opposed to the city sort of taking it on to figure out what those are going to be and to organize them and to find an instructor and to figure out the curriculum and all that. That's my view on that.
And can I offer one more monkey wrench? We have a number of nonprofits that are also utilizing home program funds, which are another federal source of housing development. Why for strategic partnership funds or for CDBG public services, you're still dealing with other nonprofits that could have board issues, and might want to pass that one off. But.
So I'm going to look at Jeff for a second, but I think most of the organizations that get home funds have budgets over $100,000. Yeah, I probably all, maybe the Madison County, they probably even do as well. So, so I think those groups they would be above our threshold for the groups that we're talking about.
They would be above that threshold that we were talking about when we were talking about strategic partnership funds, but if we were talking about board fiduciary responsibilities and the use of public funding for these purposes, then maybe that's another discussion, but that can be raised.
And maybe we can raise that, we can put that on the agenda of the next home consortium meeting, since that's it's sort of a separate pot of money. Okay, so then I'm going to officially make a motion that's sort of the same criteria that we did for capacity building for SPF that we also do now for CDBG, but using SPF funds to fund that capacity building or other community development funds to fund that. Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Great. All right. It's not a neat bow, but it's a bow. So, Thank you all. And again, this is, you know, the first year that we've done this, we will need to get feedback on how it worked, how it can be different, yeah, so going forward. All right, moving into the really fun stuff. Cedar Hill, how's this gonna work? Is there gonna be something behind this? You wanna set us up, Jeff?
Yeah, Paul and I are up, and he's preparing the presentation. I'll give you just a little bit of history.
Pull that a little bit down or closer to you so that
A little bit of history about this, and some of this will be on our slides, but I do want to note that you know, we began the process of this Cedar Hill property in literally even before I got here, back in 2007, when the city's Housing Trust Fund funded an affordable condominium development project on called the Villas at Cedar Hill, on a piece of property immediately adjacent to the 16 acres of Cedar Hill property that the city owns. That project failed. The timing was terrible. It was trying to sell condominiums in 2008 and 2009 when the entire predatory lending thing happened. The environment became that you couldn't sell a condominium to anybody because all the lenders were dropping out during that. Things became, values dropped, as you might remember during that time. And so the developer who had a large construction loan with a local bank defaulted on that loan. They foreclosed, the city foreclosed at the same time. And we bought that piece of property, that 16 acres, on the courthouse steps. It was a piece of property that was associated and was collateral for that Housing Trust Fund loan and for the bank loan. So we came into possession of that 16 acres. The major obstacle to development at the time was there was a sewage pump station that was located 50 feet over the line on the original parcel that was designed to serve not only the condominium project, but all of that developable area with a capacity of I think around 350 units, which MSD had actually built and allowed the developer to finance as part of the development scenario. We sought access to that sewage pump station. The developer refused, wanted to charge what we believe to be an exorbitant amount, $500,000 for access to that pump station. So we went to court and completed that court process in somewhere 2012, 2014. So already we're like 4 years into this thing, trying to figure this all out. And now Paul has the thing, so maybe we can take it from the beginning a little bit. But I did want you to know that this is a long-standing development in which the city has been engaged in for quite a period of time. Is it possible to take this back to the beginning, Paul? And Paul and I are going to tag team this presentation, but since I was here for the history of it, I just thought it might be helpful if I, without going too much into depth, except to say that we eventually prevailed at in a number of court settings, one of the really positive things that happened during this is that the North Carolina Appeals Court agreed and actually put into their decision that affordable housing was a public good, and allowing then the city to engage in a variety of activities supporting affordable housing, having a court decision that actually said it was in the public good. And that had been a question at that point in time, and Janice was very involved, and It was pretty exciting.
We keep a copy of that case if anybody wants to read it, because it is one of the first times that affordable housing was viewed as a reason that, they should grant this easement. It was a condemnation action actually for a little easement area, but it was a win for affordable housing.
So just to place the property for you, this is sort of northwest Asheville. It is adjacent on the west side to county property, as well as to the north. If you were to continue along where you see the Jehovah's Witness Church, just a little bit past that, you make a right, half-mile down the road, you're at the Johnston Elementary School, just to give a sense of where we are. Deaverview Road is the road that abuts where you see the Sunrise Baptist Church. It's about a half a mile going back east. I get a little confused here. North is up in this particular map here. If you go east, then in a half mile, you're at the Mountain Housing Opportunities Westmore community, 72 units of tax credit housing, and adjacent to that continuing east is the Deaverview Public Housing Community. So we're in a community of very, very mixed income. If you go to the west, there is Piscaview Road, west-southwest is a private sector development of about 80 units, which has been there since the 70s, and it's affordable, kind of by its history and investment patterns. So it's not a publicly subsidized housing, but it is housing of choice for lower income households in the area. But there's also pieces of property in this neighborhood that are now going for $1 million, for at least listed for $1 million for single family home development. So it's an area of the city that is interestingly developing, and the county developing fairly quickly, and a place for which this property, which was appraised for less than $500,000 in 2015, is now appraised for $1.5 million. So you get a sense that just in that short period of time, the recognition of these changing property values is really happening here.
And you may mention this somewhere else, but just, and I don't want to put you or Paul either one on the spot, but in terms of public transportation and like grocery stores, if you could just, I think a lot of people may be aware, but just, you know, to help set the stage.
Sure, the locational aspects of this is that we are about a mile to Patton Avenue. When that is where either going east or west on Patton Avenue, there's an Ingles grocery store a half mile in either direction. It's not that far in fact, to the I-40 exchange at Inca. It is only 2 miles to downtown. It is on a currently served 1-hour transit service. There is a local grocery store at the corner of Piscaview and Deaverview Road, a Latino grocery that is there. And I will say that the Johnston Elementary School is a major community gathering place, and is seen really as a center of community education and in many ways a social life for families in that community. I will say though, even though it is so close, it's still perceived as somewhat far. And one of the things that in design, as we look about that, is making sure that, and I think Paul will emphasize this as well, is making sure that this is not just a housing development, this is a community development. And part of the instructions during our charrette process had been to make sure that we're thinking about how does this development enhance the community and contribute to community life, and not just be a mixed income of development with affordability as a primary criteria. Sam, is that sufficient in terms of that? So I think we've gone through most of this, and just to note that in the fall of 2017, the Community and Economic Development Department did retain Joel Osgood, who had been the leader of the Habitat process in design, which was the Asheville Design Center was retained by Habitat for Humanity to lead somewhat of a charrette process, a community planning process. And Joel Osgood, a local landscape architect, had led that process, next slide, and actually had come up with a visioning study which did show the feasibility of a larger development. If you would see the next slide, you'll see the, next slide, you'll see this was part of Joel's work to envision what a larger development there would look like. He also had a more suburban type development with fewer units, but it just showed that it was feasible on a sort of penciling out process to see if this was possible.
And we still have these documents if anyone wants to take a look at them, and we use them as an initial outreach for our community meetings to kind of get the conversation started, and they worked really well when we met with the folks out there at the Cedar Hill area, so it works really well as kind of a primer to start some good conversation.
That study by Joel Osgood was part of a pre-development process, and that was in early 2018. Council approved a process that would lead to the development of the request for qualifications or request for proposal, as well as, and we'll come to this shortly, a number of criteria for city-owned land as affordable housing. So in 2018, again, staff decided to do more due diligence. Bowen National Research, who I think you're aware has done a lot of affordable housing market analysis in our community, beginning back in 2014 when they, 2010, 2014, I think it was 2014, was the first time they were retained to do a housing needs assessment and market analysis as part of our community development block grant and home funding process. So they're very acquainted with the community. I was retained to conduct public participation process and leading to 2018, the master plan charrette process. I don't really think, this is fairly self-explanatory, but I think it is important to note that these guiding principles that were in a resolution by city council members, I believe in December of 2017 or January of 2018, are the values and outcomes that your staff is embracing throughout this process as the core guidance for the development of city-owned property for affordable housing, and has become the mission statement in many ways for what we seek to happen at Cedar Hill. Note that, Julie, that environmentally sustainable approach is a key element to this. To have a diverse community with rental and ownership occupations that attracts various ages, incomes, and overall demographics. So just to note that these are what has been guiding the process all the way through, both staff and consultants. You wouldn't be surprised to know that the Bowen market analysis key findings forecast a continued strong economy and a continued strong rental demand. I think what was interesting was something that I think you had long suspected, the staff had long suspected, that home ownership demand, especially for households who are moderate income, is growing very, very strongly in the community, that demand. And Bowen noted that. He also, next slide, he also noted that made perhaps some surprising things. Looking at the Cedar Hill market specifically, that the growth was highest in that neighborhood in households earning less than $35,000. there were more more household growth in those who are aging. Well, I mean, we're all aging, but some of us are aging more than others are aging apparently, but in the 55+ demographic, there is more growth. That not in any way understating the need of larger families, but just as statistical analysis, over 70% of the households in that market area are 1- and 2-person households. But that the relatively high crime rate in that area, which by the way, I will note, is associated with every public housing community in the city of Asheville, where you have concentrations of very, very, very low income people, right? I mean, it's just that, so the Beaver View and Westmore communities contribute to a relatively higher crime rate for rural settings than other parts of Asheville, and hence it lessens the attractions for higher income households. Okay, next slide. Finally, his recommendations that a mixed income product and a combination of rental for sale product made sense. That the rental pricing in that area seemed to make sense with city's goals as well. That a for sale product, particularly a condominium product, was likely to be very popular and successful there. And that he did note it is one of the most underserved areas in the city for indoor recreational uses. I'll just continue, since I led the community engagement process with Paul's assistance. We had 2 public information sessions at Johnson Elementary School. We had a focus group with housing professionals, and we met with the newly elected directors of the Asheville Welcome Community Land Trust. The next slide. At the Johnson Elementary School, it was some key takeaways. Is that that the density was generally considered acceptable by the community that was showing up there. We were talking density of around 250 units for that development. Very strong support for a community center. Very strong support for trying to bring more commercial services into that area. A lot of concern about transportation, both internal and external, and support for community land trust. Now, also note that there were some immediate neighbors who said, I think that road is going to come right out where my property is. And interestingly, one of those neighbors who said that said, but I bought this piece of property here after these plans had already been in place, so I kind of knew that was going on. But if you could put the road someplace else, geez, that would be great, but I'm not really going to complain. So it's kind of interesting, that sort of...
A rare moment of self-awareness.
Yeah, right. There was the alignment between the community input at the public sessions at Johnson Elementary School and the housing stakeholders was interesting, very aligned. These housing professionals, by the way, included developers, architects, engineers, community advocates, a wide range of people for whom housing is a key part of what they do or what they pay attention to in their service orientation. And mixed income housing, necessary and achievable. Mixed rental and ownership, also desired and achievable. Mobility, an important part of things. Noting that affordability is achieved not just through housing costs. That group strongly endorsed having a master plan because they felt that it would enhance its attractiveness for developers in an RFP or an RFQ process. And they also felt that the farther the city could take the infrastructure planning, the more interest there would be and the more attractive the development would be to housing developers.
And just to, jump in, we're, looking at these city-owned properties and trying to balance, a planning process versus an implementation process to make sure we kind of get it right. So there was initial talk like, okay, well, we've got this land, let's go out there and put out an RFP, and let's get these units on the ground. and assist with the mixed, income, affordable communities. But then really getting out to the community, and providing what developers were asking for, which was like, don't send us to a community that doesn't want any, that you want to build or we want to build. Make sure you meet with them, and what does the market analysis say, and really meet with the community members. And it was really fascinating. We made, I think, a very good choice in hearing from the community and then meeting with the housing stakeholders. It was great that we know we need the units on the ground, but it's more important to build that affordable mixed income community. And so I think the process kind of laid the groundwork for working with Future City and Land to make sure we're setting it up right through a process. And it worked out really well. And I think the feedback, as you'll see from even when we worked with the consultants in the charrette, and of course the Community Land Trust Board. Jeff?
I'll just note, this was very early on. Really, the Community Land Trust continues to mature quickly. But at the time, they just confirmed their interest in being a partner in this process through, and in a variety of ways. And I will note that they were very important to them were these three values of transportation as a key issue and affordability, that it need to be diverse enough to serve families who needed larger spaces, and that childcare was a significant issue of affordability and probably was a key function of a community center in order to have a healthy community. So with the support of management, we move forward with the charrette master planning process. The idea behind this charrette process is that you bring in the expertise that has the actual design and development experience for these kinds of processes, and you marry them with, maybe not the right word, you associate them closely with the regulatory folks in the community, with the development people in the community, with the sustainability folks, with the local architects and engineers, and you combine this experience of working in many, many different settings with the on-the-ground stuff that's local, so that you are eventually coming out of this process with something that across the board you have a consensus could be built, that is a buildable, achievable outcome that you're planning. It's not pie in the sky, it's something that can really happen. And as I mentioned earlier, the guiding principles approved by council became the charrette mission. The charrette team was led by Bruce Toller of Toller Anderson Kim. If some of you attended the Housing Summit, I think a year and a half ago maybe, Bruce was a keynote speaker at that. His experience came out of Katrina. He was an architect in Louisiana and Mississippi, designed one of the first Katrina houses, and then became and is recognized as one of the leading new urbanist developments, designing walking communities that are in scale with the communities in which they're being developed. And he brought in Mike Thompson and Marcus King, who are both very experienced, Marcus particularly out of Detroit, in working in urban communities. He is an African-American architect who is also now being known as one of the leading architects for new urbanist design in the country. So we had a great team. The charge was to design a site plan that was aligned with the city's goals, that would actually support an RFP, RFQ, and would be sufficient detail and clarity that we could hand them off to an engineer for the creation of construction documents. There were three phases. First phase was behind the scene, making sure that we were clear on what was going to happen. Next day was the 3-day planning and design. It says cross-section of city staff. It also included outside experts in our community. And then the refinement into materials which we're providing you today.
And the resources, the Bowen report was handed over, appraisal, all those kind of the due diligence we had done was shared at the beginning of the charrette process for the phase 1 to lead to a better process with the 3-day planning charrette, et cetera.
So the conclusion of that process, to jump ahead, was, were these notes, and I'll note each one of these, that with the goal of 250 homes, we achieved a design of 239 residential units. And I will note, by the way, neither staff nor consultants nor the charrette leaders necessarily consider any of this in stone. But it was really showing that a site design with this kind of density, from both the regulatory standpoint, the design standpoint, the community standpoint, could be developed. That it's a mix of a variety of building typologies. It includes opportunities for ownership and rental. The size of units, their location, would allow for a wide variety of incomes to be served, and for age mobility, so you could actually age in place here at this development. You would not have to leave this community over time. That it would have a community center would be a key aspect of that development. That it would be interior would be walkable, but it would also have those connections necessary that were external into the community. That would be sustainable, and that it would be really a mixed income community.
And in similar challenges with other city-owned sites, you know, we don't want to concentrate a lower income. We want to make sure that there's a mix out there with the housing authority's property, with the tax credit property, and some other issues. It was definitely interesting that through the charrette process, how that mix of incomes became such an important issue as well. Again, repeating this point, but it was a very good learning experience that we need more than just the units on the ground. We need to really develop this affordable mixed incomes community. They wanted to see a community, and it was a great learning lesson.
I won't go through all of these, but these were some of the, this starts to show how the charrette and the design, but also the values that drove it, are going to be the values that we think are going to be key values that are in direction that is included in the request for proposals and request for qualifications. That we're going to need developers who have experience and capacity in bringing these attributes to this development. We can move along, Paul. Some of the, now these typologies are examples, and we would expect that a developer would bring their own sense of design, their own design professionals into an actual development project. But just to give you some sense, and this would be an 8 to 12 unit building. Here's another 8 unit building. Here's examples of 6 unit structures, 4 unit buildings, 4 unit buildings, townhome, quadruplex, and a single family home. And I'll note that none of, in scale with the neighborhood, one of the interesting questions was, well, what is scale here in this neighborhood? And I think it was both our regulators, the design professionals we brought in from, and the community members themselves, this is not a 6-story place where you're going to put 6-story, 6-story buildings. You're going to probably be limiting your scale to 3 stories. And really looking and saying, how do we use this? It's not a purely urban setting. It's a transitional setting in what's perceived as a rural area, but is really a quickly developing suburban area in the city of Asheville. That's very close to all the things that we value when it comes to transportation efficiency and community life. So this is we'll go into some detail of this on here. So here's, you can see the location of building typologies. Again, keep in mind, north is up. Deaverview Road is running across the bottom of the plan, and Piscaview Road is running to the left of the plan. So a place for single family homes with ADUs, a 16-unit development, which could be elder housing, duplexes, 8-unit developments near the street, larger buildings, but have the potential for multi-use. So you could have developing commercial or social service activities, and a community center located very much at the, we purposefully looked at locating it close to Deaverview so that it would serve more than just this development, so that it would be accessible to the broader community. Michael?
Yeah, just a
Just a question about the map. Why are the single-family homes kind of isolated off to the one side of the development?
It is in large part because there is significant property available for development. We'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. You see those two streets going off that way. It is connected to other developable property that we think will also have these sort of mixed income and mixed use attributes. And so it's an opportunity to connect out in that area, and also to provide a little bit more land setting for those developments in a place where the topography supports that. So it's in part relating to the topography of the site, as well as to the opportunity to look to expand the development area.
I'll just really quickly point out where the community center is. I know it's a different color, but
Sure, this is right down here. And this whole area, which would be close to, as Jeff said, to the Deaver View area right at the bottom, so it could be, enjoyed and an amenity for the whole community. And an interesting thing here too, of course, by nature, by blending and building these different type of housing units, by nature, we're building types of homes for different types of incomes. And there's renter and home ownership, but also you might have a smaller like townhome style, or in one of the 8-unit buildings versus a single family home. So you're already kind of trying to blend and build that mixed income community.
This is an important point that Paul made in that regard, is just that a question will be, how will this be developed? And one of the things that this allows for is the potential to have more than one developer involved in this process. Habitat or the Community Land Trust might take on the single-family homes and the ADUs, for example. A developer who is more actively involved in multifamily might take on this 8 units, or the 12 unit, or the 16 unit. A developer that is interested in for sale product might be interested in developing townhouses. So the idea was also to create diversity and the potential for greater participation by the local development community in this project.
So Jeff, just to Michael's question, so these are single family, these are single family, those are single family, are these also single family?
Yes.
Okay, so there's some, maybe a little more.
Single family duplex, so some of the smaller units you see that could also support a duplex development.
And the ADUs was interesting how that came up in the conversation with the housing stakeholders in the community. So an ADU that by nature could provide an affordable rental unit for somebody in the community working
Long
down.
term.
Yep, long term. And at some point assist, exactly, but at some point assist the family to stay in that home by having an additional income. So it kind of can serve that dual purpose out in this area.
Connectivity is one of the important values, noting that at the top of that, you can see that there's, that footbridge would go across the stream that goes into the condo development that still hasn't changed at all since the time of its foreclosure, and is available, I believe, for sale. But it would connect to, how do you get to Johnson Elementary School is kind of the question, and part of it is, how close can you get through internal or relatively internal safe routes before you have to start looking at developing sidewalks on larger thoroughfares, to keep those costs down, but get as close as you can to try to do that. You'll note that, as I mentioned before, on the right side of the map, the connection to future and existing development. One of the thoughts has been, could you get a greenway or a walking path or a bike path that would go to connect to Deaver View and the Westmore development, for example, without having to go out on Deaver View Road? And would this kind of development facilitate that? We have the connection to transit, both could happen at the street, but it also could happen at the community center itself. And you'll note that there are any number of ways to move through this development that do not necessitate going on a paved roadway. So those connections, those transportation connections, are an important part of this.
And something that, again, solidified the reason for the Shrug process, because some of those great ideas, the connection to Johnston Elementary, came out of that process and from community members really wanting to look for that connectivity to the local school.
And then just one more set of call-outs, building community and sustainability. Note that there's a community gardens area planned, community market and multi-use space, the terraced common space, which could be used for community events in the where the townhouses are planned, the community center, which we pointed out before, which is actually conceptualized as a child care center on one floor and community center meeting space on another floor. 2 park areas. You can see a number of stormwater management areas that again follow the flow of the topography, and a north-south orientation that would allow for solar development on almost all the rooftops in that development. Not to say that's the way things are going to go, but to say that the site lends itself to that, and the terracing is part of that. It's just a few examples, although this was not designed for this project. This just gives you an example of what that terraced walkway could look like. Here is a concept of what the community center could be, fronting on the park area. This was developed as part of the views for this project. And here we have looking out what that stormwater management area could look like, and how we are able to achieve some density while still protecting, preserving, and enhancing the natural landscape while using it for the benefit of the community, both here environmentally by making sure that stormwater is managed effectively, but also more broadly looking at how we might set up a model for how to use this on other property.
And a nice, how a mix of home types can work naturally together in a setting like this, where there's the open space in the middle with single family townhomes, et cetera, there possible.
And Paul, maybe you'd like to do the next steps.
So next steps that we're possibly looking at, or will look at, is the RFQ, RFP process. So I think we're finally at that point. We certainly have talked to a lot of developers who are interested in taking a look at this 16 acre. I think the interesting thing, will it be a master developer? Will it be a phase plan? Is there someone who will come to that plate to do the whole project? But I think we have enough information now to work on putting out an RFQ, RFP sometime towards the end of January or February. The city infrastructure is an interesting conversation, and a lot of the research, a lot of cities now are talking to help with the affordability issue. Of course, there's the land that you might want to put into the deal, whether that's a sale to them for $1 or at least $1 a year, but also can the cities provide the infrastructure for a plan, and that's kind of on the table, something that we're discussing internally. Is this something that the development team might take on that's looking at the high impact sites? If we have 319 Biltmore, Matthews Ford, and then we've got Cedar Hill, we've got 360 Hilliard, we've got potentially Oak Hill, there could be a lot of development happening to build these communities. How does it fit in for the best practice to move forward? Continued community center discussions, so we've kind of joined in some good conversations. I think there's a couple things planned in January to talk to the county and see where that community center conversation goes. The expanded footprint, the possibility of getting additional acreage. So y'all might be hearing about that shortly, but the land to the east of this property is available, and so that is something we're looking at, that could expand this footprint from 16 acres to nearly 40 acres. And so does that give the city an opportunity to get ahead of building a affordable mixed income community, moderate income community, and so we'll see how that pans out. The school capacity, that came up in a lot with the charrettes, especially in the community. If we're adding 239 homes, what does that look like for a school basis? Children, families entering in the area, talking with transportation on what kind of, does this need to be a 30-minute route? Is there something we can do there with a master plan? Those kind of discussions would happen. Again, the continued community engagement, and then we'll probably come up with some type of timeline here after the first of the year. And that is what we're looking at for next steps, and I believe that is the last slide. At this point, we'd love to take questions or feedback. We'd love to see what everyone thinks here at the HCD.
You spoke about connectivity, I'm sorry, we spoke about connectivity, but I don't think I heard, who would be in charge of putting in sidewalks, the developer?
Just want to deal with questions.
I love the idea of doing as much internal connectivity as we can, and then, see where we can get with an RFQP process with the actual sidewalks along the streets.
One of the things that's been suggested by some of our participants throughout this process is whether, instead of having multiple homeowner associations, for example, that land could be in trust. And then the homeowners and rental communities could look at how they would share the trust of that property over time, and have coordinated maintenance and coordinated activities, as opposed to, oh, the homeowners just only associate with the homeowners over here. You really have a broader community context.
Have you had a conversation about if there would be multiple developers coming in, some for single family, some for the multifamily, about putting in place at least some design guidelines, so you're getting a consistency of look and feel? Yeah.
That would be a part of the process, absolutely.
I think it's amazing.
Yes.
I had a question about, so the multifamily that you had set aside, I've seen master plan developments more in the Chapel Hill, Raleigh area. We don't have that many developments that are master plan like this. But often one of the great opportunities for tax credit housing was when there was a parcel in the middle of a master plan community that was big enough for a tax credit development, which are usually always bigger than 16 units. Like I used to live in Pittsburgh in a master plan community that had land set aside, and then an elderly, a senior development was put in there. And tax credit developers look for this kind of thing because the Housing Finance Agency wants to fund developments that are in a community with a mix of housing types and maybe the daycare or whatever. That, I'm wondering if when you were conceptualizing, or the concept came up, if anybody thought more could be done with that parcel that has the 16 units on it. So it could be a standalone spin out for somebody who does tax credit development. That was one thought.
I think there, Janice, or if you look at the 6 unit, those are 10 6-unit buildings. So there's a 60 unit right in the center that, although it's in, if you look at the lower legend, you see 6 unit. So right there where Paul is pointing, so you actually have 60 units in that area, that if this were in a competitive tax credit area, which it is not right now, it would not compete successfully for 9% credits according to the current QAP. But if it were, or if a 4% credit project could be a part of this, that could be reconfigured in a way that would be easier for a developer to build that kind of units in that area. Probably easier than down the other side, getting farther away from the entrance to the building. But yes.
I know. All while keeping in mind that if there is this additional acreage here, and then we've already got a tax credit property here, and we've got the deed review public housing here, still trying to keep in mind of the importance of that mix of income and not concentrating on lower incomes to still attract the amenities and the investment to the community that we hope to see around doing something like this. But it has come up as a 4%, and possibly if we get that additional land, how does that look? But as you probably know, Janice, most of those 4% deals are going to come with a gap of $5 to $6 million. How do we fill that? And not in an opportunity zone, by the way, if anyone had that question,
Well, one thing to note here in terms of mobility is thinking about mobility from the Deed Review community and from the Westmore community into the kind of ownership opportunities that could be presented here, affordable ownership opportunities, much like Keith had us thinking about how the Hilliard site would relate to people who are already living in the South French Broad neighborhoods and the South Side neighborhoods, and how there could be growth and enhancement of opportunity for folks through home ownership. Well, this presents the opportunity potentially to be able to, again, to do that in your community, to not have to go outside of your community in order to have those home ownership opportunities. And that connection we think is very important about this location.
Any other questions from?
My one other
Yeah.
question was about the commercial piece, and the same kind of thing, when you usually see master plan communities, sometimes the community centers will be done by a YMCA or YWCA or somebody that already does that kind of development and then can open up to the rest of the community. So making sure that whatever's available there is something that would be attracted. I mean, I don't know where the YMCA is over there, but sometimes they're looking for land, and I didn't know if they were any stakeholders from those kind of groups.
That has come up in the conversations, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that in January to see how that fit exactly happens.
What was the discussion around how this growth would impact Johnson School?
Yeah.
What was that discussion about?
I think it came about a lot from the Shrek folks and the families, especially the public engagement, where the community members, love Johnson Elementary, is concerned about capacity with 239 potential new homes. So they wanted to make sure that we were being proactive in our conversations. So, and you hear that a lot, I'm sure, from the community, are we having those conversations? So, we want to make sure that we followed that lead and we're proactive talking to Johnson Elementary, which we have been. I think there's going to be more discussions happening on that as we move forward to RFQ, and then the importance of the developer realizing the impact on the school and the importance of that connectivity.
Okay, we'll go ahead and take public comment on this. Sure. Come on up to the mic if you would.
Hi, my name is Kate Tanan. I'm on the fundraising committee for the ABCLT, and I don't know a lot about development, probably know very little, but based on the development stakeholders that you've been talking about, the variety of them, when do you think development, physical development, groundbreaking would actually happen? What's like the earliest you would think it might happen?
I'm always, makes me nervous to throw a date out there.
I understand that.
If we could get an RFQ, RFP out, and Jeff helped me out here in January, February, and we have like a competitive process and look at that depending on how that is, I would think we could choose somebody by May and then perhaps start with some site work in fall of this year, which might be a little bit aggressive, but depending on how things plan, yes.
Okay, thank you.
We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Right. Great.
Hi, Greg Gann, Children First Community Schools. I just want to say kudos to the thinking around this and the opportunity to engage a number of stakeholders. Just been really impressed with y'all's openness to that. And also, as an organization who's promoting family-friendly, affordable Buncombe that blends the importance of housing affordability, preschool, and transit together, this development really hits all those notes with the possibility of a child care center. I think that's an amazing opportunity there. And Nicole had to leave early too, but she also said that she was very excited about it and share that too. So thanks for the thinking on this and look forward to continuing to see how it goes.
I'm going to ask, I'm seeing Kim in the room. So it's the W1 that goes out there. Do you, are there plans in the transit master plan? I mean, we already have, no. You said it's an hour-long service. What is it?
W5?
It's, so, which is it?
The W5.
Oh, it's the W5.
Hour-long service.
So, but it's not, that's the W1 that goes out there. And it's already 30-minute service. Yeah, it goes to Deerview. That's. No, I'm sorry, you're right. There's 30-minute service on Haywood, and then W1 keeps going, so it is only 1 hour. That's right, okay.
You don't need to add to get the half-hour service.
Right, and so my question is, do we know if there are plans in the transit master plan to increase that service? Do you know?
On Patton Avenue or on W1?
On W1?
And for fiscal year 1, ideally, I think that's the plan.
Okay, okay, so we could already have a plan for there to be 30-minute service of it. for these things. All right, any other questions, comments?
No, it's just a great project. It looks pretty good starting off, and hopefully, based on the RFQ, what happens with that, we'll start to see more development. So I'm excited about it. I think everybody else is excited about it, and I'm just encouraging the process as it moves forward, and whatever that we can do to assist, let us know, and keep us posted.
Yeah, thanks very much for your work on this.
And Julie, if I can say just a special thanks to Jeff on this, too, for, helping us put this together. On a side note, I can remember before I started working here at Jeff's house, having a glass of wine, so I don't know if Jeff remembers or not, but talking about this site and talking about putting together some kind of HOA that worked for everybody on the site and helped bring community together. So it was a start of a conversation probably 14 months ago, so here we are, but great work by Jeff.
Great, thanks to you both. I just had a thought about that. Oh, okay, all right, so that's our agenda. Any other public, yeah, I'm gonna do that. Any other public comment? Okay, so a couple things. First thing is, and I should have done this when she came in the room, but for folks who don't know, our new city manager snuck into the room, Deborah Campbell over here. If you have not met her, I encourage you to take not this very moment, but when we're finished, take the opportunity to introduce yourself. We are excited to have her, and thank you for coming and hearing the work of this committee. A couple thoughts. And Paul, you alluded to this, but we've got Cedar Hill, we've got Oak Hill, we've got Matthews Ford, we've got Charlotte Street, we've got Riverside, we've got all these potential projects teed up. And even though, like a year ago, I would have said we have so much money for affordable housing, when you start looking at all of these things getting teed up, suddenly we don't have a lot of money for affordable housing. So you guys who do this all day long probably have in your head, what the dollars are going to start to look like. But I'm wondering if someone can kind of come up with a spreadsheet for us that really starts to lay out what the city's investment might be, because frankly, we really might be looking at the need for another housing bond or some other major source of funding.
No, absolutely, and we have in our kind of redevelopment team with the high impact sites started to timeline that, not only with development, number of units, but also the expenditure of funds. And again, we're considering, and I've actually already done it, putting in Cedar Hill and these other ones just to see how that all pans out, because if everything aligns, we could have potentially a good amount of development, working towards that goal of affordable mixed income communities. And so I think a timeline, and it was on our next steps to put something like that together. We probably could bring that back next month.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just need to start seeing, we and the public need to start seeing how big these numbers are and getting used to figuring out how we're gonna get it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one other, just, I think we're all generally aware of this, but sometimes we need to reinforce it to ourselves. One of the challenges we've got is not just the funding, is, we're not Charlotte, we're not even Greensboro, and so the ability to, from a construction standpoint, to have the construction phased and to be able to have the construction industry absorb some of this construction is going to be really important. And I think the timeline will help us with that in terms of, one, working with our local development community, and two, expanding the pool, which is one of Paul's major job responsibilities, is to help us expand the pool of qualified and experienced development teams that have an interest and the capacity to do this in Asheville.
So then, future agenda items, so we just talked about one. I had spoken to Michael earlier about, I don't know how many people know this, but the MHO project at Klingman and Hilliard that we made an affordable housing trust fund award to has changed. I don't know the degree to which it's changed, but the structure has changed. I know there are new partners involved, and we had talked about inviting MHO to our January meeting to sort of tell us about that, and are they still going to need housing trust fund dollars, and are they still going to meet all the requirements of that award? So if we can do that, that's all right with y'all.
Put that on the agenda.
Okay, great. And so you'll reach out to MHO about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, super. Any January agenda items for you all? Okay, Great, and with that, I think we are adjourned. Everybody have great holidays and a happy new year, and we will see you in January.